On the cold morning of December 7th, 1995, three men were found deceased in a Range Rover in an isolated farm track in Rettendon, Essex by two farmers. All three of them had been shot. But who were they and why had this happened? As always, I mean no disrespect to anyone mentioned in this video, and this is all public information that I have found on the internet that I have compiled into one video. Thank you to Marty McFly for suggesting this case to me. Slumped behind the wheel of the car was Craig Rolfe, a 26-year-old man who was a known cocaine addict and a member of the gang, the Essex Boys. Only days before he was found murdered, he was suspected to have killed a rival drug dealer by giving him a lethal injection. Found behind him was 36-year-old Pat Tate, who was an 18-stone bodybuilder who abused steroids and was the gang's enforcer. He had a bad history of violence, including domestic assault charges against ex-girlfriends. In fact, the night before his death, he attacked a restaurant manager by slamming his head into a glass plate counter because of an argument over pizza toppings. Next to Pat Tate was 38-year-old Tony Tucker. He was the leader of the group and a doorman who controlled the drugs trade in multiple Essex nightclubs. The police opened an investigation into the murders with the code name Operation Sentry. However, it produced no arrests or evidence that could lead to a criminal prosecution. On the 9th of February 1996, whilst the operation was still underway, the IRA detonated a powerful truck bomb in South Quay, Canary Wharf. The explosion killed two people and caused an estimated £150 million worth of damage. The IRA had sent warnings 90 minutes before detonation, but the area had not been fully evacuated, which resulted in more than 100 people suffering injuries, some life-changing. This event marked the end of the IRA's 17-month ceasefire. Anyone who was involved as a witness to the triple murders of the Essex Boys entered into a witness protection program, as one of the suspects had received a call from Belfast only minutes before the Canary Wharf explosion. However, there was no Irish connection to the murders and no connection found with the bombing. When transcripts of the phone call to the suspect from Belfast became available, police acknowledged that it was part of an undercover operation. Special branch officers from Ireland were repeatedly calling the suspects posing as Republican drug runners and had named themselves Irish Billy and Irish John. They were trying to arrange a meeting under the ruse that one of the Essex boys that had been killed owed them money and that they were still after the repayment. Nothing came of this as they were unable to convince the suspects to agree to a meetup. Problems arose during Operation Sentry when undercover officers were found to be foul-mouthed and threatening towards the suspects in an attempt to manipulate them into giving away information about the murders or any illicit activity they could be involved in. One of the suspects who had been threatened was actually a girlfriend of one of the deceased Essex boys with whom she had a young child with. She ended up going to the Essex police as she was getting threatening phone calls from who she believed to be Irish Republicans threatening her and her child's life. Police pretended to investigate so they didn't give up the undercover operation they had in place. They told her that the calls were made from Belfast and did have Republican connections. Police went even further into trying to scare her by stating that whoever was making the phone calls to her had crossed the Great Britain and they had no further information because they'd lost track of them. The behaviour of the police has been greatly criticised in this situation and has been labelled as torture tactics due to the state of mind she would have been in as she was a young, grieving, distressed single mother. Towards the end of 1997, a trial was brought to Essex Police for the behaviour that was shown by officers during Operation Sentry. One of the suspects the police were going after had recordings of multiple phone calls made from undercover officers which was played in court. He had recorded the calls because he didn't believe that the Belfast Republicans had ever funded any criminal gangs in Essex and did not fall for the trap as officers had hoped. The recording showed the increasing level of violence and manipulation that was being portrayed by the officers. In May 1996, Darren Nichols was arrested for cannabis importation. He made a deal with Essex Police when he revealed he had evidence on the Essex Boys' murders. 2 men were arrested and put to trial: Jack Arthur Holmes and Michael John Steele. They were both convicted and sentenced to 3 life terms on January 20th, 1998, after Darren Nichols gave evidence as a witness in court. He explained to the jury that he was the driver for the 2 men that night. He stated how he drove them to Rettendon under the impression they had business to attend involving drugs. He only realised what had happened after the fact when he drove them away. He said that Jack Holmes had white surgical gloves and overalls on, but they were bloodstained. The court also heard how the 2 men dismantled the guns and found it amusing when Michael Steele's shotgun fell apart. Darren Nichols explained how he overheard Michael Steele tell Jack Holmes how he felt like an angel of death and that he did everyone a favour. After giving evidence in court, police provided Darren Nichols with a new identity and address. It is unknown whether he stayed in the UK or was moved abroad. There was no physical evidence linking the men to the crime, and the prosecution relied on Darren Nichols' account of what happened and mobile phone evidence, which was later found to be unreliable at a Court of Appeal hearing. Police believe the motive behind the murders was connected to £500,000 worth of cannabis that was found in a farmer's pond in West Hanningfield. There were 53 black packets that had been dropped off from an aircraft. Apparently, Michael Steele had imported low-quality cannabis for the boys to sell. Pat Tate was enraged by this and threatened Steele, saying he was going to make him beg for forgiveness whilst he was on his knees and kill him. However, Michael John Steele and Jack Arthur Holmes devised a plan and lured the 3 men out to Workhouse Lane under the impression to learn about a cocaine assignment. When they arrived in the Range Rover, they were shot with Steele's shotgun. However, 4 months before Darren Nichols made his statement to police about the murders, another man called Billy Jasper claimed that he was actually the getaway driver for the killer of the Essex Boys, and it wasn't Jack Holmes and Michael Steele. Billy Jasper stated that Patsy Bolt-Eyes Clark was the one who ordered the 3 men to be executed. Patsy Bolt-Eyes Clark is a known criminal who has connections to the Brinkmats robbery from 1983, where a group of men made off with £26 million worth of gold bullion that has not been recovered yet.
Armed men stormed a warehouse near London's Heathrow Airport. They tied up the guards, poured gasoline on them, and threatened to burn them to death. Then they left with 3 tons of gold and a quantity of diamonds. The value of the theft, $46 million Canadian. Brian Stewart reports.
The giant robbery was fast and ruthless. Just before 7 this morning, 6 armed men broke into the top security Brink's-Mat warehouse near London's Heathrow Airport. Then they made off with an incredible 3 tons of pure gold, nearly 8,000 bars of it, worth about $46 million Canadian. They were well gone by the time police arrived to start their massive dragnet. It's believed the mob will have to melt down the gold as it's easily identifiable.
What sort of volume would it take up? How big would it be?
Well, my information is that it's in total bulk, it would be, if one were to stack it together in the boxes, do you follow? That's something 6 feet in length, about 3 to 3.5 feet in height, and about 2.5 to 3 feet across.
In other words, the gold pile is about the size of a small table, not an impossible stash to hide or to bury. This afternoon, an insurance company offered an unprecedented $3.8 million reward, while police are said to be still baffled by the speed and ease of the robbery.
In 1992, he was jailed for 6 years for laundering more than £4.2 million worth of the $26 million known to be stolen. Billy Jasper was arrested on suspicion of robbery on January 14, 1996, only a month after the murders. He wrote a note in his cell claiming he was paid £5,000 to drive a single killer, who he named, to the scene of the crime on the night they were murdered. He wanted to speak to detectives investigating the triple murders and requested protection as he was worried his life was in danger because he knew too much.
Right, it's got how long? Right, what the time now, babe? About 1:30. Right. When he comes back, what happens then? Got 200. Yeah. What's the second older look like? looks like a rock and everything. I'm like, that, yeah. Do you remember what it was like, what colour? What did he say? So he got back in the morning and said, let's go.
He claimed the Essex Boys were killed over a robbery of a security van which Patsy Clark had masterminded but did not take part in. On Tuesday, October 17th, 1989, 4 men who were led by an associate of Tony Tucker stole more than £400,000. Police intelligence said that 2 of the men went to Spain and left Tony Tucker to launder the money through the security contracts he had at various nightclubs around Essex. When they arrived back in the UK, all 4 men were charged and later convicted of the robbery, with each of them being sentenced to 15 years each. Tony Tucker was questioned in connection to the robbery, but was never officially charged with anything. The 4 robbers later got released on appeal in 1994 and wanted their money back. Billy Jasper stated that Patsy Clark was owed close to £300,000 and the last person known to have possession of the money was Tony Tucker, the leader of the Essex Boys, but he had stated that he started to spend the money. The statement continues, claiming that Patsy Clark arranged the hit through an East End crime family who supplied the pump-action shotgun and a Fiat Uno with false plates. They also provided the hitman and a backup gun. Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Craig Rolfe were lured to the scene of the crime under the impression that they were selling 4 kilos of cocaine to the killer. The statement continues, explaining that he dropped the killer off at a field a mile away from the crime scene, where he disappeared before returning to the getaway car sometime later. When police started to investigate, Billy Jasper took them to the location he dropped the supposed killer off. It was away from any access to the farm track the bodies were actually found. However, an associate of Patsy Clark, who was thought to be involved in money laundering, was one of the last people Essex boy Pat Tate called on his phone. The phone call was around 6:26 p.m. for 17 seconds on the day the 3 men were shot. The prosecution believes they were killed at around 6:48 to 6:59 p.m., even though Billy Jasper's statement says they were killed around midnight. The person Pat Tate last spoke to was never questioned, despite the significance this phone call may have had on the investigation. Billy Jasper's account was never formally investigated because senior detectives felt it was not in line with the strategic direction of the investigation. They would not be able to complete a thorough investigation if they decided to look into these claims, as Patsy Clark died at the age of 81 in November 2018. Billy Jasper even stood as a witness in the murder trial for the defense. He admitted to being the getaway driver and was restricted from giving any names or details of the armed robbery in question. He was only allowed to refer to the killer as Mr. D. In 2018, Jack Arthur Holmes got his 25-year sentence reduced by 2 years after he showed exemplary behaviour in prison. In 2021, he was released on parole and is now living with his mother in Suffolk whilst working as a car mechanic. He would have been released from prison earlier if he had confessed to the murders, but instead he served his sentence and appealed his conviction at every opportunity he had. Michael Steele was placed as a Category A prisoner at the beginning of his sentence and was placed in a maximum security prison at HMP Wakefield. He has served 2 years over his 23-year minimum term as a Category A, but in March 2022 he was downgraded and will most likely be moved to a Category B prison instead, which means that he has a chance of parole too. He was awarded £45,000 in damages when a tooth filling fell out whilst he was an inmate in Belmarsh prison, which left him in severe pain for several years. He was awarded damages when the courts found the prison did not give him adequate dental care and left him to deal with the pain by himself. In 2010, he attempted to sue the Ministry of Justice for £100,000 after he was beaten unconscious by other inmates. He suffered damaged teeth and a fractured eye socket after being beaten with a steel pot at maximum security prison HMP Whitemoor. He wanted to be paid damages because prison staff were not adequately supervising the inmates, which allowed this to happen. During the legal proceedings, Michael Steele made the claim that Muslim gangs were impossible to control and discipline due to their numbers. He told stories of assaults on other inmates involving boiling sugar water and sharpened toothbrushes because of their objection to cooking pork in the kitchens. This claim was inevitably thrown out by the judge as he had sustained no permanent injuries. That is the case of the Essex Boy murders. Do you think the ones convicted were the ones who actually did it? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, don't forget to subscribe so you get notified about my next true crime case. And also let me know if there's any cases you would like me to look into next time.